Ms. Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member, for hosting a hearing on Chinese Communist Party's economic aggression. The CCP is determined to dominate critical supply chains through massive industrial subsidies, forced technology transfers, and intellectual property theft. United States trade and economic policies must align with our strategic goals to strengthen supply chains and reduce dependence on the CCP while advancing standards and rules that serve our interest. One important area in this regard is American leadership on digital trade. Ambassador Lighthizer, the CCP playbook on digital trade centers around censorship, forced data localization, and control of cross-border data flows. It seeks to export these practices to other countries around the world because control of digital economy serves its malign influence. At USTR, you negotiated the first ever digital trade chapter in the United States-Canada-Mexico agreement, as well as US-Japan digital trade agreement. Both agreements set a high standard for digital trade based on American standards. Presently, there seems to be a lack of U.S. leadership on digital trade. Do you agree? How can the United States push back on the CCP playbook for digital trade in the Indo-Pacific region, especially as it relates to localization and data flows? Will American leadership in digital trade help our American small businesses expand into new markets?
Well, thank you for the comment and for the question. I think what we did in USMCA and in the Japan agreement were very important, and I think these technology issues are particularly significant. My own sense is that with respect to countries like China, you're never going to get any kind of an agreement on banning data localization, right? It's just to me at least a lost cause. And I think the same thing is probably true in Europe. I think Europe is always going to demand data localization. I think continuing those kind of negotiations where it makes sense, we should do it. But as a general matter, the overall principle of banning requirements for data localization is one that we're just fundamentally not going to win, because it's in the hands of those countries, right? In the final, so we have a valid principle, and we certainly did it with respect to Canada and Mexico. We did it with respect to Japan. I would suggest maybe that those three countries are different than some of the other countries we're dealing with, but I do think there's a lot that can be done in the area of digital trade. I think Congress has to be careful to make sure that it maintains its ability to regulate technology in the future, that we don't do something in these agreements that would prevent you from doing something that you thought necessary down the road. And I think there is some work being done on digital trade.
Thank you. And second question is Dr. Schmidt. Could you speak a little more to the CCP playbook on digital trade and how they craft rules and standards to export their model of the state-controlled digital economy, and how important it is for the United States to be writing the digital rules of the road when the CCP is trying to pass us by and dominate 21st century technologies like artificial intelligence?
I think what happened with Huawei is instructive. So China has a subsidy program for purchasing things from China. For example, we'll pick an African country. And the Huawei products are cheaper than the other global competitors anyway. So you have an African country that is not particularly wealthy, and they ultimately make the Huawei choice for good economic reasons. As part of Huawei, they get a whole set of firewalls and censorship capabilities and services above it, which are not representative of Western or American values. Some of the countries use it, some of them don't. But more importantly, it also serves as a signal intelligence network for the Chinese. The Chinese government is very obsessed with Chinese nationals who are in foreign countries. So there's lots of evidence of surveillance through these techniques and lots of aspects of SIGINT in general. So there's a good example where the fact that there was not a globally competitive and relatively inexpensive and well-financed choice caused countries that they didn't want to buy it, they didn't buy all that other stuff, but they got it as part of the package. That's the threat. So you can imagine, going back to what the ambassador said about how trade works, imagine that as more and more of this stuff from China gets embedded in all these other countries, it comes with all of these additions. And these additions are things that we would never allow.
Thank you. My time is up. I yield back.
Mr. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. America's competitive advantage over the rest of the world can be summed up in 3 I's. First, investment. America's singular capacity for capital formation. The U.S. alone accounts for half of the world's capital. Second is immigration. America's singular ability to attract people and talent from across the globe to drive both our entrepreneurial and our essential workforce. And the third is innovation. America is a nation of intrepid investors and immigrants who drive innovation. As a country, we are in danger of squandering our greatest competitive advantages that the CCP could never dream of rivaling if we here in Congress build the political will necessary for unleashing the power of investment, immigration, and innovation to their fullest productive potential. In the end, our greatest enemy is not the CCP. Our greatest enemy is ourselves. It is the deepening dysfunction and maddening myopia of a politics that prevents America from becoming the best version of itself. America at its best can outcompete any adversary anywhere, including the CCP. Simply put, the 21st century is ours to lose. Dr. Schmidt, your team at SCSP points out that in 1620, Francis Bacon, one of the fathers of science, identified 3 revolutionary technologies in his time: printing, gunpowder, and the compass. In the spirit of Francis Bacon, Dr. Schmidt, tell us, what are the 3 most revolutionary technologies of our time? Which country is leading in those 3 fields, the United States or China? And how do we win in those 3 fields? And please do not include soybeans from South Dakota in your answer. So,
Well, I'm a big soybean fan, so
I approve that message.
So there are many candidates for your answer, but I think a simple list is quantum, AI, and biology. Quantum, because quantum is a whole new world of computation and communications and scale that is just beginning to be powerful. I would score us as somewhat ahead, but not very far ahead. We might be even. And as an example of what China's done, they launched a satellite which entangled essentially 2 photons that were entangled when they arrived on land 2,000 miles away, which is an extraordinary achievement. The U.S. has not done that yet, so that's of concern. In AI, as I've mentioned, there's every reason to think that they have more people working on AI, they understand its strategic initiatives, the sanctions that were put in place have helped us, but I think that that's a temporary advantage. And then in synthetic biology, and there was a discussion about this earlier, and for all of you, you should understand that synthetic biology ultimately means that America will grow many of the things that we manufacture today. Growing them is obviously more energy efficient, it's more climate friendly, but it's also another interesting thing. We have an awful lot of biomass in our country, especially in the Midwest and the more rural states. So here you have a technology which can revolutionize the job loss and the migration into cities by creating this enormously interesting set of industries in each of the states of our heartland. That is both a politically good thing for America, but it's a good economic choice. We need to win all 3 of those.
who's winning in synthetic biology so far?
So far, I'd say we're slightly ahead.
So we're slightly ahead in quantum, slightly ahead in AI, slightly ahead in synthetic biology.
And when I say slightly, if I may, we're talking about a year or 2.
Yeah.
Not very long.
Or some would say a few months with respect to AI.
Yeah, depending on who you ask.
The Biden administration has put in place export controls that prevent the transfer of the most advanced semiconductors to the CCP. In response to those export controls, NVIDIA designed new chips specifically for China, H800. Is the H800 sufficiently advanced to enable China to be competitive with the United States in AI?
So the H800 is not shipping yet, but the conventional wisdom is that you need 3 of them for every H100 which we're using. So one way to understand it is that China will need 3 chips to 1. And that's a fairly significant delay because these chips are hard to install, hard to program, and so forth. It's all very difficult stuff. China has some other disadvantages in AI. One of the things that people don't understand is that innovation is a repetitive game. They've not been doing it enough, whereas, for example, at Taiwan and chips, they've been doing it so well, they've really learned how to scale it. And the third disadvantage that people don't appreciate with China is that we're training on English language, and there's not as much Chinese language for them to learn from. So those advantages, I think, are at least a few years of advantages. And I think that the current policy, which allows the H800, which is essentially network speed gapped, it's slower, is probably an acceptable compromise.
Did everyone have
Time has expired.
Okay.
Ms. Hinson.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member. I appreciate you hosting this hearing tonight. Not only do we have soybeans in Iowa, but we also have a quantum program at the University of Iowa. So I'd like to point that out. We have a lot of beans and quantum. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, to our witnesses. You're helping us get at the core mission of our committee, which is really how do we counter the economic aggression coming from the CCP. And we've heard a lot about the promises that China has made over the years. The CCP has wormed its way into international trade agreements, but a common theme across our hearings is really that this is an adversary that can't be trusted. And it's clear the CCP cares really about the CCP. In our first hearing, we learned about the threat to our country and how they operate counter to our American values. In our second, we learned a lot about how they don't care about their own people and are exploiting slave labor. And now we're learning that they don't keep the promises that they make or the promises that they break. So let me ask you all tonight, and we're going to go kind of rapid fire since I know we're short on time, but about the commitments that we have heard from the CCP. And I'm going to address all 3 of you at the same time, if you'd all answer. But did China live up to their end of the Phase 1 trade agreement, particularly when it comes to imports of U.S. goods? No. Are we all in agreement here? That's a resounding no? Okay. What about commitments on intellectual property rights and stopping rampant theft of American innovation? Has the CCP lived up to those agreements?
So I would say no, but they have made an effort in certain areas, but
overall, you would say no?
It has been reduced. The joke in the industry was that they'd already stolen everything. There was nothing left to steal. Sorry to make a joke about that.
It's sad, right?
But it's a sad joke.
Yeah.
But it is reduced, but it's still a problem.
And you agree? You agree with no? Okay. What about trade agreements with the U.S. and our allies? Has the CCP historically lived up to those agreements, yes or no?
So when you say trade agreements, you're really talking about the WTO, I guess, right? And the GATT. And
right.
I would just say no, and I drop a footnote down that says the USTR comes out with a 190-page report every year about all the various breaches.
Right. Well, we saw in the opening video, obviously, the narrative that was surrounding their addition to the WTO more than 20 years ago, and now we have seen the reality of that. Can you provide some examples of maybe some of the other broken commitments from the CCP when it comes to trade, IP?
So, as I say, there's a 190-page document on it, and there's numerous cases that over the years in various administrations, particularly the last 3 where we brought WTO cases against them, there are access to various agricultural products. There are agricultural subsidies. There's financial services. There's the implementation of their trade laws. I mean, and keep in mind that a lot of what we complain about that's bad that they're doing has nothing to do with trade agreements, right? This is the banking system, the labor system. That's why I'm for overall tariffs, because I don't think you can play whack-a-mole and win this game. You're not going to win by saying you stop this. They just do something else. But for sure, they haven't kept their commitments. But the problem is far bigger than commitments they made. They have a system that needs to be that we need to take a step to balance the system, all of it.
Right. So when you look at the I guess the most favored nation status, for example, things like that we've given them, we can't trust a word the CCP says when it's making promises to us. So why should we continue to give them sweetheart deals like MFN? Because I think that obviously gives them an upper hand. We've given them these ways to get into our trade agreements and supersede us and cheat. So why should we continue to enable them to have that kind of a status is I think I'd be looking at from a policy perspective.
So, should we take back permanent normal trade relations? Absolutely. I was against when we did it. It was obvious at that time it was a mistake. Of course we should take it back. But you have to do more than that. You also have to change the column 2 tariffs, because then they would go from MFN to column 2, and column 2 are sort of higher tariffs, but there's some of those you'd have to change because they're like there's not a high enough tariff on automobiles. You'd have to make a modification there. But I've been around Congress a long time. I've never had no one would ever elect me to anything, so I don't have to worry about that part of it. But I've been here as a staffer and the like, and it's when the members that I talk to, I would think you'd have a vast majority of the members of this current House that would vote to take back MFN and give higher tariffs to China, right? I just can't even imagine who the people. There'd be a handful of people for whom this is a religion, and there aren't people who have it. They can have that, but I completely agree with you.
Yep. And I know my time is up, so Mr. Chair, I yield back, and I look forward to continuing this discussion when we have more time. Thank you.
Gentleman's time expired. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by expressing my sincere appreciation to the witnesses for their testimonies and taking time to share their expertise. Now, in this committee, we've explored a number of topics related to U.S. economic posturing, from the CCP's role in the genocide of Uyghur people to the United States' relationship with Taiwan and our global supply chain. While we have spoken in depth about the roles of larger U.S. corporations, I'd like to circle back to what Rep. Stevens touched on, which is to discuss the roles of small and medium-sized businesses within the supply networks. So, Mr. Robinson, how are small businesses uniquely equipped to address economic competitiveness? Specifically, how can these businesses provide solutions to diversify and harden the U.S. supply chains?
It's really outside of my wheelhouse, to be honest with you. I've just been concentrating too much on the financial sector to have a good, solid answer for you on that, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Anybody else like to?
Well, I would just, and I'll be very quick because I'm taking up. So there's kind of, when you talk about small business, there's manufacturers. You would think of, and then there's a small business that's an importer, right? The small business importer is kind of in a different position. But if you look at who was hurt most by the hollowing out of Americans' interest and these it's the small manufacturers. It's these towns where they have one company, and that we all know them. You all have them in your district, and they had one company, and that company or a bunch of them basically lost out because we had a trade policy, and part of it was NAFTA, but the biggest part of it was China, and those were the people that suffered the most. They were the ones that were incapable of making some kind of adjustment. What can they do? So those small manufacturers are the ones we should be focusing on, and there's a lot of innovation and the like that comes out of those people. And in many cases, they're the heart of their community.
That's right. Thank you. Dr. Schmidt, what approaches can Congress take to boost America's manufacturing other than imposing tariffs on imported goods?
I already mentioned the notion of smart manufacturing. And there's a lot of evidence that onshoring and reshoring works when you're building more sophisticated, higher value added products, because having the manufacturing closer to the R&D center is a net benefit because you have faster iteration. So over and over again, I think the strongest part of our story is that we have integrated software and hardware designs, and we have the factories close together, and they're very flexible. Think of this as CNC machines gone crazy, right? All of a sudden you have 3D printing, very, very sophisticated manufacturing. I spent a fair amount of time visiting plants that do this in America, and they're making good money, right? So one way to think about the manufacturing question you ask is to reimagine manufacturing as the high value added part, right? I'm not going to worry about the commodity part, but I'm extremely interested in having that stuff that's very sophisticated be built here. The salaries are higher, the gross margins are higher, it's American branded, and it's a direct benefit from our capability of innovating in each category.
Thank you so much. As I've expressed my work as the ranking member on the General Farm Commodities Risk Management and Horticulture Subcommittee, it is critical to support our nation's farmers, especially the soybeans. I have also emphasized people that are hungry in schools, at work, and elsewhere are at a strategic disadvantage. In this regard, cuts to our nation's food security programs could negatively affect our current and future federal workforce. Ambassador Lighthizer, please describe the correlation between human productivity and the satisfaction of fundamental needs.
So I'm talking about the satisfaction of fundamental needs and productivity. Productivity. So I would say, put them.
Microphone.
I just turned it off. So I would say clearly, if you, my focus all along was on working people, right? If you're not taking care of the fundamental needs of the working people, they're not going to be productive. I think it's just, I mean, you're more of an expert on this, on the nutrition and all that side of it than I am. But to me, if you're not taking care of the fundamental needs, you're not feeding them, you're not educating them, you're not making them learn about law and order and how the society's structure and how families operate, then you're losing the most important part of our productivity. It was one of the P's that someone was talking about, right?
People.
Yeah, it's one of the P's. So I completely agree with that notion.
Thank you. My time is